So I want to share a story with my experience with Divine Mercy. In the August of 2017, my mom and dad called me up one day, and my folks live in Mount Horeb, so I talk to them all the time. But one day my mom's like, "Have you talked to your Uncle John lately?" And I'm like, "No, not really. I haven't seen him in a while." John is my dad's younger brother by 10 years, and he lived in Madison, and he was like, he was like everybody's favorite uncle. He had that contagious giggle, and everybody was like Uncle John, and he was single and all this kind of stuff. And I'd see John about every month or two when he was over at my folks' house, because they did stuff every other weekend. But they hadn't seen him in like 3 months, 4 months, and he won't answer my phone calls. Could you give him so they asked me, can you give him a call? Because he'll listen to you. I'm like, what? All right. So, and it was a super busy time. I'm literally getting ready to start a new job, and so I'm like, okay, I'll try and get to it this weekend. Well, on I think Thursday or Friday, right before I was going to try and give him a call, my folks called me up and said, we decided to just go over to his house, and what we found was not good, and he's in the hospital now. And they said, I'm like, well, what's going on? They said, well, he hasn't been taking care of himself. He hasn't gone to the doctor in like 15 years. And they said the apartment was just a disaster. And they said he's got advanced colorectal cancer. And they've already said it's terminal. So, which, coincidentally is what my wife died from. And so I went down to the hospital to see him. Keep in mind, he's 10 years younger than my dad. When I walked in the door, I saw a man in bed that looked 20 years older than my dad. My dad at the time was about 79 years old. And of course, I walk in, I'm like, John, you look like heck. That's kind of our relationship. I was kind of making a joke. And he kind of chuckles and goes, well, that's quite the bedside manner you got there, Steve. But anyway, my mom and dad had been there for a while, and so they said, well, we're going to leave. Why don't you and John just talk for a while? And I'm like, okay, and so we started talking, and like I said, he looked like he was pushing 100. He looked horrible, and he was only 69 years old. And we started talking, and all of a sudden he just kind of says, Steve, I felt like Angie's been with me this whole time. And I said, and it's like I saw this door crack open, right? And I'm like, John, she is with you, and she wants to be with you, and she wants to lead you back to Jesus. And we started talking about faith. He had not been to church in 50 years. Okay, he hadn't been since he was probably like 20 years old. And we started talking, and we just had this, he's crying, and I'm crying, and we had this really wonderful talk. And I wasn't at that point where I'm like, yeah, let me get the priest in here, that kind of stuff. But I knew that was close, and because I wanted to get him back in the church, because we knew he wasn't going to live. We figured, he had a few months, things like that, and that's what they were telling us. So I said, can I come back in a day or two and see you again? He's like, yeah, absolutely. And so I'm thinking to myself, okay, this is where I'm gonna drop that bomb, right? This is where it's gonna happen, and we're gonna get him back in the church. And so it was Monday. I was gonna go back and see him, and I was ready to go down there. And my mom and dad said, no, they're gonna put a shunt in because he's not eating, so they want to be able to feed him and things like that. So they were having a surgery at the time I was gonna go, and they said you can go down tomorrow. And then they're going to start preparing him to go to hospice and things like that once they get him stabilized. So I'm like, okay. So about 3 o'clock in the morning, maybe 2:30, 3 o'clock in the morning, the phone rings. And my phone was on vibrate, so I didn't even hear it. All of a sudden I hear the phone, the landline ringing in the kitchen, and we never use our landline. I mean, there's this phone on there that we use. I don't even know why we have it, other than we have to keep the line to keep the internet price down. But I hear the phone ringing in the kitchen at 2:30 in the morning. I'm like, what is going on? And then I look at my phone, I've got like 3 missed calls from my mom. And she's like, we're down at the hospital, and it doesn't look like John's gonna make it, can you get down here? And I'm like, okay, and I'm literally starting my job the next morning. At 8 o'clock, I'm going to a brand new job. And I'm like, okay, yeah, I'll come down. And I had this moment where I'm like, oh, I should just lay down, I'll get up, in a couple hours, and I'll go down there. And in my heart, I hear like, go now. Okay. So I just kind of instantly woke up, and I get in my car and I start driving downtown. So I'm like, Father Rick Heilman's a friend of mine. And so I texted him. I'm like, I'm heading down to the hospital now. They say my uncle's going to make it. I don't know what I'm going to find there. If I need you, can you come down and give him last rites? And he's like, yeah, absolutely. I'm here. I'm texting him at like 3 o'clock in the morning. And he says, let me know which is fine when you get there. And I'm like, okay. So I pull into the parking ramp, and the whole way there I'm praying Divine Mercy Chaplet. I'm praying my rosary for John. I'm like, just let me get there. I don't know what I'm going to find. I park my car, I run in, you know, the security guard's there. I'm like, my uncle's dying upstairs. He's like, go. So I go running up, get the elevator, go up to the 5th floor, walk in, and the second I walk in the door, the monitor clicks, and his breathing changes. And having gone through that, I know this is it. He's going to die soon. The nurse looks at me and said, he's been waiting for you. I don't know what made her say that. I didn't know if she knew me from Adam, but he's been waiting for you. So I pull out, I got a St. Benedict crucifix in my pocket, carry it with me all the time. And so I don't know if any of you guys have been around someone who's in their final hour or two, but it's called the death rattle. So it's this really strange kind of raspy breathing. It's almost like they're suffocating, but it's just the way the body shuts down. And I took my crucifix and I laid it right on his chest. And so what happens is when they're doing that, their eyes are just barely open and they're just, they're making that noise. And I lay this crucifix on his chest, and his breathing changes, and his eyes fling open, and he is just looking at something right there. And I pull out the Divine Mercy, my rosary, and I'm like, Mom, Dad, we're praying Divine Mercy Chaplet. We don't know it. I'm like, all right, just follow along. And so we're praying it, and it starts off, sign of the cross. There's a short prayer, which is optional, and I didn't have it in my head at that time in the morning, so we skipped right to it. And there's a prayer that says, "O blood and water which gush forth from the heart of Jesus is a fountain of mercy for us, I trust in you." You pray that 3 times. And then you pray in Our Father, Hail Mary, in the Creed. And Jesus said about that particular prayer, he wants you to pray the chaplet in the presence of the dying, but he says about that particular prayer, if you pray this in the presence of the dying, I will come to them not as the just judge, but as the merciful Savior. And we pray that prayer 3 times, and John dies right then. And we prayed the whole chaplet. And literally I had no time to text Father Rick to get anointing the sick for him. And afterwards he says he's gone now. It's a sacrament of the living. I can't give it to him. But later that day I went and I saw Father Rick and I told him what happened. He's like, I think you saved him. He says, God is going to honor your effort, and he's going to honor his promise of the chaplet. He says, I'm not going to make any promises, but he says, I think you saved him. This man who hadn't been to church in 50 years, and the moment of his death, he looked into eternity, and I think he saw Jesus standing there. We prayed that prayer, and I think Jesus came to him and saved him. He's probably going to spend a lot of time in purgatory. Not that he was any worse of a sinner than I am, but I think he's going to make it. And so I have great hope in that. And so that's why I encourage you guys. Some of these prayers aren't just like, just like something to be into, right? We might save souls with this, okay? We might save our own soul, those around us. Maybe this isn't your devotion, that's fine. Find something. Find one thing. That's why we give you so many of these different things, is find that one thing and latch onto it. That's why Jesus gives us so many options. There's hundreds of devotions. There's thousands of prayers. He's hoping for that one that's going to grab each and every one of us, that's going to be the one that gets us and pulls us in, so that he can hold us close and he can say, I love you. You are my cherished son or daughter. Experience my mercy.